Hello, everyone. I hope you all had a good weekend. And let's do our customary check to see if you can all see and hear me without any issue. Excellent. Thank you, Lee. Thanks, Josh and Leo. Excellent. Very good. So we're all set to start. Okay. So a little bit of a preamble. The required readings were, of course, Kim chapter 9, and then for Wednesday, Kim chapter 10. Um, I did make some optional but recommended readings available. Or better yet, we'll call them supplementary readings available. And those were three chapters out of Susan Blackmore's book, Consciousness and Introduction. And Well, I had intended to lean more into Kim's stuff. I've actually decided to stick with my past approach to this material, and that's actually to lean more into the Blackmore stuff. If you haven't read it, it's probably not a huge deal, but I would encourage you to read it after lecture. The reason I made this change, well, there are several reasons why I made this change. One is that, frankly, Blackmore is just much more accessible than Kim. Um, she discusses a lot of the same ideas that you find in the last two chapters of Kim in these three chapters from Blackmore, um, which are chapters one, two, and four. But I think she does it in a very accessible way. Um, so I will kind of, I'll be riffing on Kim's work a little bit, if I can put it that way, riffing. We will open it up for some discussion of the sort of issues that Kim raises in chapters 9 and 10. We'll be mostly looking at the stuff from chapter 10 on Wednesday. But that's why I have this big giant set of slides for these two lectures on consciousness. So, how does that sound to everybody? And another question, how does that sound to you? But also, if you did read the Blackmore readings in addition to the Kim readings, how did you find everything? Would you agree with my opinion on the accessibility of Blackmore versus Kim? It's not a trick question. I'm not trying to catch you if you didn't do the readings before lecture. Wow, everybody's very quiet today. I guess we are getting to the end of the semester. Um, anyway, I guess all this is to say, if you did read Kim and didn't read Blackmore, your reading of Kim is not a waste, right? Okay, yeah. All right, thanks, Liam. Um, I wouldn't say skip Kim, but I would say, especially if anything in your final essay has, if your essay has anything to do with consciousness, Kim's chapters on consciousness are very good. Blackmore's chapters are also really, really good. Um, that's okay, Lee. Yeah. Yeah, Blackmore is a very good explainer. Um, so that's why I'm kind of leaning into that material a little bit more, at least as far as the slides go. Another reason is that with the end of the summer term, oh boy, teaching two courses over the summer is a lot of work. And I've used Blackmore a lot in the past, so I don't think I'm being lazy, technically speaking, but I am leaning on material that I'm a little bit more familiar with, right? So I guess I'm able to teach it a little better for that reason. But enough of my ramblings. Let us get on with the question at hand, and that question is, what is consciousness? And I actually have a seminar, a first year seminar on consciousness that I teach at Carleton University. Incidentally, that's where I use Blackmore's work. Um, and in that course description for this first year seminar, I always include something like this, right? What is consciousness? Well, on one hand, we're all familiar with consciousness because we're all conscious beings. So in a certain respect, um, consciousness is familiar to us all. We all know what it is like to be, right? To borrow some of Nagel's terminology. On the other hand, um, owing to owing to our not knowing how consciousness actually works, um, the study of human consciousness, or even animal consciousness or artificial consciousness, I think represents something really intriguing, mysterious, and perplexing. I like the way Daniel Dennett puts it. So Dennett is quoted in Blackmore. Human consciousness, he writes, is just about the last surviving mystery. A mystery is a phenomenon that people don't know how to think about yet. And this reminds me actually of something that Kim says in the final chapter, I believe the final chapter of his book, um, when he's discussing the hard problem of consciousness, which we'll look at. We'll probably get to that on Wednesday. Um, but Kim says something like, we've solved, using a physicalist approach, we have solved a lot of mysteries. But the mystery he mentions is the mystery of life. Using a physicalist approach, by coming to understand everything from um, DNA, genetics, evolution, understanding how metabolism works, understanding the development of organisms, um, understanding how proteins are folded, right? All of these little things that we've figured out under a physicalist project, we no longer need to appeal to, Elan Vital or the soul, like the Aristotelian notion of the soul, to explain why things are alive. The question remains whether we can do something like that with consciousness, right? That's why consciousness is so mysterious. As we'll see today, one of the reasons why it's so mysterious is because it looks like it's quite difficult to explain subjective consciousness from an objective physicalist sort of perspective. And so what Dennett means is that maybe we don't know how to think about consciousness in the right way to explain it. So, um, what what are we talking about when we're talking about consciousness? In everyday vernacular, we use this word in a lot of different ways, right? Um, to be conscious, in one sense, is just to not be unconscious, right? Right now, I'm conscious, but earlier I wasn't because I was asleep. Um, so there's that sense of the word conscious, or which just says that you're awake and that you're aware, right? Speaking of awareness, and it can also mean that you're aware of some particular thing, like that I'm conscious of the coffee mug sitting beside me. We can say like of people who are self-conscious that maybe they're sort of like overly aware of certain things that they might I don't know, perhaps be embarrassed about, right? At any one time, I can be conscious of some uh, mental states, certain beliefs, desires, or emotions, say, while remaining unconscious of others, right? So I might have, for example, unconscious emotions or dispositional beliefs, right? Like how many of you are conscious of your belief that Canada is in the northern hemisphere? Well, like with my shoe example or my chair example, right? How or breathing, anything else like now you are, um, but you weren't before, right? Like, yeah, like Joshua says, not until I mentioned it. But it's not like before I mentioned it, you didn't believe Canada was in the Northern Hemisphere, right? That's a belief. That's a dispositional belief. You're not aware of all of your dispositional beliefs all the time. You're consciously aware of occurrent beliefs, but not dispositional beliefs, unless we make them occurrent, right? Um, so, likewise with other things, desires, emotions. That leads me to the next thing. When we talk about things being unconscious, well, when things are when we're not consciously aware of things, well, where are those things? Where are those beliefs, desires, and emotions, and etc. that we're not aware of? Well, it is a bit of a category mistake to ask where a mental state is located, right? Um, but we do often say that these things that we're not consciously aware of are in the unconscious mind. And so we can use consciousness or conscious to differentiate between these two. I'm hesitant to use the word areas, but these two different areas of the mind. I don't like putting it that way, but um, of course, the notion of the unconscious mind was first, really articulated in detail by Sigmund Freud. Nowadays, we've kind of moved away from the idea of a Freudian unconscious to cognitive unconscious notion of a cognitive unconscious, right? So, yeah, Lee, good aspects of the mind. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you're right. That's better than areas. Then we're not. Well, as we'll see later, we have this worry of something that Dennett calls Cartesian materialism, and we want to avoid this, right? So we'll use areas of the, or not areas, we'll use aspects of the mind. Um, so, the cognitive unconscious would include things like, whatever beliefs, desires, or emotions that you're not consciously aware of, but it also includes like automatic cognitive and perceptual processes that can work just fine without any conscious control. So the example that I've used, I think I've used before in this class is that you don't have to consciously try. If you're a native speaker of English or if you're fluent in English, you don't have to make a conscious effort to understand what I'm saying to you now. You just understand it. And that's because of all of these little automatic cognitive and perceptual processes that are going on that run along just fine without any conscious control, right? But what a lot of philosophers are interested in, what Kim is interested in, especially in chapter 10, what Blackmore is interested in throughout this entire book, is subjective consciousness or phenomenal consciousness. So, subjective conscious experience. That's what we're interested in when we say consciousness in this context. Now, here are some different views on consciousness drawn from chapter 9. Kim sort of canvasses a bunch of different thinkers here. Some will be more familiar, and some we haven't really talked about. Of course, we've talked a lot about Rene Descartes. Um, and for Descartes, what you are is a thinking thing. And thinking here, a thinking thing, a res cogitans, a thinking substance, includes all aspects of the mental, right? It's not just reason for Descartes. It's your passions. It's your what I'm calling subjective experience. That is what you are, is a thinking thing, which includes being a conscious thing, unless you're asleep or something like that, of course. Ivan Pavlov, the Russian psychologist who sort of anticipated behaviorism, said that in point of fact, Only one thing in life is of interest to us, our psychic life. And he doesn't mean psychic in, uh, you know, um, like a supernatural or paranormal sense. What he means is mental, which obviously includes our conscious experience. Um, Dennett, much different, much different approach. He says, I want to make it just as uncomfortable for anyone to talk of qualia or raw feels or phenomenal properties or qualitative and intrinsic properties or the qualitative character of experience. He wants to make all of that qualia talk um, as uncomfortable as he can, with the presumption, to continue, that they and everyone else knows what they are talking about. Far better, tactically, to declare that there simply are no qualia at all. And just really quickly, Wilfrid Sellers, another American philosopher, responded, "But Dan, qualia are what make life worth living." Yeah, I like Dennett. I like Dennett's work. You guys know that. Um, what does he mean here? Do you think? What do you think he means by wanting to make it uncomfortable for anyone to talk of qualia with the presumption that they know what they are talking about? Is Dennett denying that there are qualia? In a sense. Um, what do we think? Okay, we might need to get into some examples here. Um, well, our I wouldn't say it's that. That is a problem, though. That's what we call the product or the problem of subjectivity, Liam. It's kind of related to the beetle in the box, right? Yosef, it's not that we're pretending it exists, right? Let me try and make this clear using the banana of philosophy. Okay, what color is this banana? Somebody could Photoshop this and make me look terrible for the YouTube thumbnail. I hope no one does that. But what color is the banana? Yeah, yellow, right? So this yellowness of the banana, does it really exist in my mind as a quale? Yeah, Leo, great point. We can't really define it effectively. And let's see how difficult this gets by trying to like really like look, okay, we all agree the banana is yellow. Where is that quale? Again, I might be making a category mistake, but it's not here in the banana, right? It's here in the mind. But if it's in the mind, it's not a part of objective reality, right? Yeah, Liam, like I mean, if you want to talk about it in the sort of like Lockean terms, you would say that the yellow banana is the yellowness of the banana that we are experiencing is an idea of a secondary quality. So it's an idea of a quality that does not resemble the actual qualities that the object has. That's Locke, right? Dennett doesn't quite say that. Dennett is doing something um, called quining, named after the philosopher and actually Dennett's undergraduate supervisor, Willard Van Ormond Quine. Um, where if something is not epistemologically or theoretically useful, you just sort of dispense with it. So qualia are not, what Dennett is saying is that qualia are not the kinds of things that we can objectively understand, right? They're not out there in the world. And it might not be a theoretically useful um, idea, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point, Leo. And we're going to talk about Mary, the color scientist. But yeah, like if you look in the brain where yellow is realized, I would say realized. There's nothing yellow there, right? It's just a bunch of neurons firing. Think back to Leibniz's mill, right? If you could shrink yourself down really small or blow up a brain so that it's really large so that you could walk around in it like you could walk around a mill, you would only see the mechanical parts. You wouldn't see, this person's brain that you're walking around in was looking at a yellow banana. You're not going to find yellow in the brain, right? Well, Lee, what we have are objective ways of assessing the physical properties of yellow objects. So, for example, I could put my philosophy banana through like a spectrometer, right? And look at all the different wavelengths of light that are being reflected off of this. Those aren't yellow. Those are just various wavelengths of light, right? The yellowness, the quale, is not part of objective reality. It's part of my subjective experience. Yeah. And so when Dennett quines qualia, and he has a paper called Quining Qualia that you can read if you're curious about this, that's what he's doing. But of course, sellers, well, qualia are what make life worth living. And isn't that right? Or doesn't that seem to be the case, right? What it's like, remember qualia or singular quale, these qualia are the subjective felt aspects of experience, right? And yeah, isn't that what make our lives worth living? I mean, what do you guys do for enjoyment? There's some hobbies. What are some hobbies? Lego, painting, quilting, very good. Guitar, nice. Well, the readings of the spectrometer that represent yellow, well, we can mentally represent those things, but the physical happenings are out there in the world, and the qualia don't seem to be anywhere in the world. That's what I'm saying. Um, you guys have some cool hobbies. So Sam, why do you do Lego? Kaya, why do you paint? Samantha, why do you quilt? Yosef, why guitar? Josh, why do you do all those things? At least part of the reason must be that they're pleasurable, right? So there's something that it's like to enjoy making something with Lego or painting or quilting or playing the guitar. Yeah. That might not be the only real reason that you do it. In fact, I'm a guitar player myself, and I can tell you that there were lots of times when what it was like to play guitar was frustrating. So for those of you like Yosef and Joshua, when you were learning, do you remember just how hard it was to get some of those open chords down or to even press the strings down properly? Frustrating, right? Painting too, and Lego was my go-to, I think, source of fun when I was younger. But painting, I actually used to do a little bit of painting, and I would find it the same sort of thing, depending on whether I was acquiring a skill or exercising a skill. It could be frustrating or pleasant. But those are qualia. Yeah, bar chords are hard on the guitar, May. Yeah, and Samantha has some frustrations. So not fun is what it's like when you have lots of seam ripping when you're quilting, right? That these are qualitative aspects of our experience, right? Um, it does, Leo. Yeah, the frustration makes the satisfaction even better. Um, and all of this, this is what Wilfred Sellers means, right? Like qualia are what make life worth living. Like, I mean, we do things because they're nice or because they feel a certain way, right? If you have a favorite food, you'd probably um, articulate why it's your favorite food on the basis of your subjective experience. Like, say your favorite food is, I don't know, pizza, right? You might you might say like, I love the crispiness of the crust, the gooiness of the cheese. Well, gooey sounds kind of gross, but when you have a good cheese pull on a pizza, that's one of the things that makes life worth living for me. Pizza with good cheese pull. um, the umami of the pizza sauce and the pepperoni, the savoriness of everything, the saltiness of the cheese, etc. If you like pizza and these are some of the things you like about pizza, well, those are like the qualitative aspects of your conscious experience. So yeah, qualia make life worth living. I'm sorry, Leo. One of the worst things is when I get a bad pizza. That's one of the worst. So maybe you dislike maybe I can quash your pizza cravings. There's a restaurant here in North Bay where I am presently at. Um, I think they've changed ownership from the old generation of the family that was running it to their kids. And I really hate to say it, but there's been kind of a dip in quality. Get a pizza from there, and it doesn't have the cheese isn't browned properly. I need that Maillard reaction to create flavor, to give me this, to give me the pizza qualia that I'm after. Really, in Argentina? Okay. If I ever am in the area, I will try that pizza. What is Argentinian pizza like? Oh no, now I'm getting hungry. We better not. Um, but maybe later on the Discord server. What is it like to eat an Argentinian pizza? Okay, I won't. Uh, Jorge Ray, I think it's Jorge or George. I'm not sure if this thinker is French or Spanish or Portuguese for that matter. The most plausible theoretical accounts of human mentation presently available do not appear to need nor to support many of the central claims about consciousness that we ordinarily maintain. One could take this as showing that we are simply mistaken about a phenomenon that is nevertheless real, or depending on how central these mistakes are, the consciousness may be no more real than the simple soul exercised by Hume. So maybe more of a eliminativist position here. And I think Dennett would agree with something like this. Our own experience of ourselves as conscious beings misleads us about the actual nature of consciousness. That's what I take away from what Ray says and what thinkers like Dennett says. And Dennett doesn't deny that we have like raw feels. Like he doesn't deny that there's something that it's like to drink coffee versus tea, right? Um, what he denies is that qualia are like our minds make it seem to us. Joshua says maybe qualia are the individual ways your brain processes stimuli, which would be different for each person. For example, qualia to do with color, luster, etc., originate from sight. People who are blind from birth do not know anything about color and cannot imagine it. Perhaps it is simply because the processes that would have occurred to process the information does not happen since they do not have sight. I mean that sounds plausible, right? Um, uh, yeah, but recall the inverted spectrum, right? So like where you say they've got to be somewhat tied to the physical, given they can originate from senses, of course, right? And this connects us back to our previous discussion of mental causation, right? Um, the idea that physical events can cause mental events, like a certain wavelength of light, um, reflecting off of a surface and hitting your eyes and causing certain activity in your visual cortex, right? That's uncontroversial. And getting from there to like a mental representation of the banana, right? Ceci n'est pas une banane. Uh, that is uncontroversial. Um, uh, when it comes to mental causation, the problem was whether the mental can affect the physical or whether it can affect other mental states. But now the concern for us is the inverted spectrum, right? We know that it's tied to the physical, but we wouldn't be able to know whether my quale of this banana is the same as yours, right? That's the problem of subjectivity. Like if the banana is yellow for me, but purple for you, but you use the word yellow to refer to your inner experiences, we'd have no way of knowing if our experiences of the color of the banana, our subjective experiences that is, are different, right? So yeah, kind of reminds me of the inverted spectrum. I do agree that they're tied to the physical in some way, but they're still somewhat mysterious, right? It's still somewhat mysterious how these qualia are supposed to work, and that's what Dennett is denying, right? Uh, T.H. Huxley says, but what consciousness is, we know not. And how it is that anything so remarkable as a state of consciousness comes about as the result of irritating nervous tissue is just as unaccountable as the appearance of the jinn when Aladdin rubbed his lamp in the story, or as any other ultimate fact of nature. It seems almost like Huxley is saying something like, the consciousness arising from just physical or material interactions in the brain is or nervous system. It seems almost like magic, right? That's what he means when he references the genie of the lamp from the old from the story, Aladdin and his lamp. Um, so we have no clue. And recall, right? If you read on the hypothesis that animals are automata and its history, you know that Huxley thinks that human beings and non-human animals are conscious automata. So we are automata. We have mentality, but our mental states are all epiphenomena. So they have no causal powers. But a further issue is how it arises from the physical. Huxley's kind of saying it seems kind of like magic, doesn't it? William James says something similar. Brains should give rise to a knowing consciousness at all. This is one mystery which returns, no matter of what sort the consciousness and of what sort the knowledge may be. Sensations, aware of mere qualities, involve the mystery as much as thoughts, aware of complex systems, involve it. So, again, what Huxley and what William James are kind of gesturing at here is the mind-body problem that was really introduced by Descartes. Um, Kind of reminds me of what Nagel says here, and I believe I could be mistaken, but I think this is from his paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But Nagel says without consciousness, the mind body problem would be much less interesting. Well, because we wouldn't have one. We wouldn't have the mind body problem. With consciousness, it seems hopeless. Um, and you can see, I think, how this is all related to the mind body problem, right? How do the mental and the physical interact? Well, how does the physical, if it does, give rise to subjective conscious experience? In fact, most of the problems that Kim and Blackmore discuss when it comes to consciousness are just a version of the mind-body problem. Francis Crick wrote that our approach to consciousness is essentially a scientific one. We believe that it is hopeless to try to solve the problem of consciousness by general philosophical arguments. What is needed are suggestions for new experiments that might throw light on these problems. So, for Crick, uh, philosophy on its own isn't going to help us solve these mysteries. Uh, we've got to get out of the armchair and into the lab, and that's okay, right? A lot of, I mean, this is what neuroscientists are all about, right? Philosophers, and I think this is kind of the spirit of the cognitive sciences, right? I mean, philosophers, neuroscientists, psychologists, and all other, all those other disciplines that study the mind in some respect or another. We're all kind of interested in the same problems, but we're all attacking them from a different angle. Um, so we shouldn't be afraid to talk to one another. Maybe get some interdisciplinary work going, right? Um, Patricia Churchland, one of the famous reductionists. The problems for neuroscience and experimental psychology are hard, but as we inch our way along and as new techniques increase non-invasive access to global brain processes in humans, intuitions change. What seems obvious to us was hot and surprising news only a generation earlier. What seems confounding to our imagination is routinely embraceable by the new cohort of graduate students. Who can tell with certainty whether or not all our questions about consciousness can eventually be answered? And Patricia Churchland is one of those people who would say that, yeah, we will figure this out one day, with incremental scientific and philosophical investigation. But a lot of that is going to involve getting rid of some of the notions that we think are helpful, but which may actually be hindering us. Um, so certain things like the notion of belief um, might go the way of Elan Vital, maybe qualia as well. Now, following Kim, again, I'm leaning more into Blackmore here, but this is also the point at which Kim discusses Nagel's famous paper. What is it like to be a bat? Um, Blackmore kind of introduces this by pointing out how the question, how can consciousness just be neurons firing, or how can it just be brain activity, is a different sort of question from how can water be H2O, right? And she says that what makes it a different kind of question is the product is subjectivity. And here, subjectivity means subjective consciousness, right? There's something that it's like for a subject to be conscious, to have conscious experiences. That's what makes it difficult. That's what makes this so intractable. The problem of subjectivity, which is really like another iteration of the mind-body problem. Nagel's when he asks what it's like to be a bat, he's not asking about things out there in the world, like why your coffee tastes a certain way, why your professor speaks a certain way, right? He's not discussing these comparisons or analogies. He's not discussing strictly objective stuff out there in the world. He's asking what experience is like for a being, right? What would it be like, here to be an astronaut or a frog or a bacterium? There's certainly, I think we can all agree, something it's like to be an astronaut. It must be pretty exciting, perhaps a bit frightening, maybe lonely, right, up there in space. Um, but what it's like to be a human astronaut is going to be much different than what it is like to be a frog, right? Frogs, I think, do have inner experience, but because frogs have different bodies and live in different environments and have very different brains and nervous systems, whatever it's like to be a frog must be much different from what it's like to be a human, specifically a human astronaut. And for a bacterium, is there even anything it's like to be a bacterium? So Kim's discussion here gets a little pedantic, if I'm being honest. I think it's quite clear that Nagel means when he's asking what it's like to be a bat, he means what it's like to be a being, and Kim just gets a little bit. I don't know. Kim's just a little pedantic here. But we'll follow Blackmore for this bit. Can you imagine what it's like to be a bat? Have you ever thought about it? What it's like to be a bat or some other sort of creature? To some degree. Kaya, yeah. I've had students when they're writing their essays or writing tests, and they discuss Nagel. They always mention Batman, and well, okay, well that you know what it's like. You might maybe you could imagine what it's like to be Batman, but I don't think you could imagine what it's like to be a bat. Yeah, cats similarly. I like those videos people make where they put a little GoPro camera on their cat, and you can see what the cat gets up to when it goes outside. Those cats get up to all kinds of mischief out there. That's why I don't let mine out. Um, but when it comes to bats, let's see if we can imagine being a bat. So, there's this little idiom, blind as a bat, right? But bats see very well, in fact. But they do have to hunt uh, in darkness, right? So what they do is they supplement their vision with echolocation, and they might emit little clicks. They could be sonic or ultrasonic, and they can navigate. They can find prey. Right? Bats. Bats have to, especially the bats that live in North America. Those are very small bats. And they have to fly through forests without hitting trees. They have to navigate around buildings, and they have to do all of this while they're hunting for whatever it is they're hunting for. In this case, it's insects, right? So bats see well, but they beef up their sensory capabilities using echolocation, right? Yes, Leo. Yeah, that's right. Uh, I forget the name of the gentleman, but in my consciousness seminar, I used to show a video demonstration of this gentleman, and he's blind, and he can make these clicks like he's really good at clicking, like making very precise clicks by with his mouth, and he can use that to work out whether there's an object in front of him. Some people also have little clickers that they use. And they can click and listen for the echo, and they kind of build a spatial representation by using a sort of rudimentary echolocation. And yeah, I think maybe they'd have a little bit better of an idea what it's like to be a bat, because these bats are quite sophisticated in terms of their echolocation abilities. So some bats will just kind of fly around slowly making these clicks. And then when they detect something, they speed their clicks up, and that allows them to kind of zero in on their prey, right? Uh, yeah. Yeah, Liam, I can only imagine it not being a human. Yeah. Yeah. In reality, I have no clue. I feel the same way. Like I feel like if I'm imagining myself into the bat's shoes or wings, um, I am using my own experiences as a human being as a basis for that. So really, I don't know how close I can ever get to imagining what it is really like to be a bat, right? I can imagine I'm flying through the air, slowly clicking, and then making higher or not higher frequency, but by clicking more often to zero in on my prey. But can I ever really imagine it? I don't know. Interestingly, some bats make very loud clicks. We don't necessarily hear them because they're ultrasonic, so they're over 20,000 hertz, and that's beyond the range of our hearing, right? Like a dog whistle that you blow, and you can kind of hear a little bit of a whistle, but your dog, it's very loud because it can hear higher frequencies. So we don't hear them, but they are actually very loud sounds. So some bats can protect their own ears from really loud clicks that they're making, but let the quieter echoes in. Some bats can even use the Doppler effect. So, you know how if you're standing by a vehicle that's traveling by you on the road and it honks its horn, or maybe it's an ambulance or a fire truck going by, and the sound is a higher frequency as it approaches you and then lower frequency as it passes you and heads away from you. That's the Doppler effect. And that's because the sound waves can only go so fast. And when the vehicle is moving fast, the sound waves are getting squished together, and so the frequency increases, and our the pitch that we perceive goes up. And when it's traveling away from us, the sound waves are a bit stretched out. So the frequency lowers, and we hear lower pitched sound as the source of the noise is moving away. Now, some bats can actually use a Doppler shift, the Doppler shift, to see how fast they are going relative to the prey item that they're tracking with their sonar, right? So that's the bat's perceptual world, right? Um, it's a world of sight, but also a world of sound. And when we compare that to our experience, ours involves sound, but also mostly sight. Um, when we see the world, we see it in color, in depth, in light and dark. Um, we don't really think about the fact, unless we're in a class like this, that color is related to, the wavelengths of light. We don't really think about what parts of our brain are representing color versus detecting motion, right? And of course, the bats aren't thinking of anything like this either. But we could ask whether the bats perceive the world like we do in terms of our vision, only theirs is a world of sound. Um, to give you a sense of what I mean, have you ever seen that show, Daredevil? Am I the only one? Oh no. I've tried to use my nerdy examples, but I worry that sometimes I'm getting a little too nerdy. But we're familiar with Daredevil, right? Matt Murdock, he's blind, but he has heightened senses and he fights crime, right? Oh, the movie. I haven't seen the movie. Oh, She-Hulk. Yeah, he's in there for a bit. Leo knows the premise. Read some comics. Okay, that's good. In the show, both the Netflix show and the new one, Born Again. The Daredevil TV show is really good. But anyway, it represents, it depicts like Matt Murdock like seeing the world maybe a bit like Blackmore is having us imagine the Bat, right? So what Matt Murdock or the Bat is seeing is like a visual experience, but it's not wavelengths of light causing it; it's frequencies of sound causing it. So maybe bats see in some batty sonar version of color, right? Is that what it's like to be a bat? Maybe. But we can never know. We can never know. We can't pretend to be bats, right? Then we're just people pretending to be bats. So that won't work. Um, what if we transformed you into a bat? Well, then you might just be you in a bat body. So you wouldn't really know what it's like to be a bat. You'd know what it's like to be you in a bat's body, but not the bat itself. And if you just were a bat, you wouldn't be able to communicate to us what it's like to be a bat. And so maybe, even if there's something it's like being a bat that is different than what it's like to be a human, we could never know. And that's the problem of subjectivity. As Nagel puts it, we can know all about bats' behavior and physiology, but nothing about the qualitative character of their experiences. An ideally complete neurophysiology, cognitive science, and behavioral psychology of the bats will tell us nothing about the phenomenology of bats' experience. That's the problem of subjectivity. Um, Now, Nagel's work, I think, is a little bit helpful here for clarifying what we mean by consciousness, and the sense in which Nagel is using this term, and the phenomenon that he's interested in align with how I described things earlier. Right? Nagel's interested in subjective conscious experience, what it's like to be a being. Right? But we can make some further clarifications here. And one of those ways of clarifying what we mean by consciousness is to make a distinction between phenomenal consciousness and access consciousness. And this distinction is due to Ned Block. So what Nagel is talking about, well, when he asks what it's like to be a bat, he is talking about what Block is calling phenomenal consciousness or P consciousness. Block explains it like this: phenomenal consciousness is experience. What makes a state phenomenally conscious is that there is something it is like to be in that state. So, phenomenal consciousness, whenever we've got phenomenal consciousness, we also have qualia, right? Mental states that have P consciousness are states that involve qualia. But a different aspect of consciousness, this is the distinction that Block is making, is access consciousness or a consciousness. And that refers to mental states' availability for use in reasoning and rationally guiding speech and action. Now, if you look at in more detail at this section of Kim in chapter 9, um, Kim explains this quite nicely, actually. I know I have some gripes with what Kim does with consciousness and in this chapter. But one thing I think he does a good job of clarifying is that a lot of conscious states, it's not one or the other. It's not like things are P conscious or A conscious states. Often they are both, right? So I'm having a phenomenal experience, phenomenal mental state of my coffee cup. I look over here beside me. You can't see it; it's off screen, but it's there. There's something it's like to perceive it, right? It's being slightly illuminated by the lights that I have on here. If I reach out, I notice it's getting cold when I pick it up, right? So there's something that it's like to see the coffee cup. There's something that it's like to taste the coffee or to smell the coffee. Maybe there's even something that it's like to make the coffee. You get up in the morning, you haven't had that first cup, and you're tired. So before coffee, if you're not a morning person, you might be a bit of a zombie. And making coffee might not be all that pleasant. But then, after you've had the coffee, you feel better. And when you go to make the next cup, it's not so bad, right? So there could even be phenomenal aspects to any number of things concerning coffee, not just the way it tastes or smells. Um, but notice that those states are also available for use in reasoning and planning, right? I I have a phenomenal visual experience of the coffee cup there, and so um, I can chain up some beliefs and desires, and maybe produce some actions, right? Like, oh, there's a cup of coffee. Um, well, I'd sure like to take a sip of that. And I believe it's right there, and I have a desire to drink it. So you know what? I'm going to reach out, pick up the cup, and drink it. And I can even talk about it, right? I could tell you about my phenomenal experience. Like, this coffee is pretty good, or this coffee is too bitter, or this coffee is dark roast, and I don't like dark roast. I prefer lighter roasts. If I take a sip of coffee and I don't understand, or if I'm not aware of what kind of coffee I'm drinking, I'm going to have a phenomenal experience, but I'm also going to be able to describe it to you, and I'm using a consciousness for that. So that's the difference. It's not like conscious mental states either are phenomenally conscious states or access conscious states. It's not like that. Uh, they're kind of like two sides of the same coin. I have a little bit more to say about access consciousness versus phenomenal consciousness, but I think I'd like to take a 10-minute break because I perceive I've just had a phenomenal conscious experience of lukewarm coffee. Um, and I'd like to use my the access consciousness aspect of those states in order to form a plan to make more coffee. And perhaps some of you would like some coffee too, or pizza, since apparently I can't do a lecture without talking about either pop culture or food. So let's do a 10-minute break. I have 3:30 on the oven, on the clock on the oven. Let's come back at 3:40. All right, I'm back. Let's get started again. Now I know what it is like to have a fresh cup of coffee uh, in the middle of lecture. Mm. So the last thing I wanted to say about the distinction between access consciousness and phenomenal consciousness. What was the last thing I wanted to say about it? I seem to have forgotten. Um, I suppose there can be some instances. I've remembered what it is now. There can be some instances where we have, or there's some debate about whether there are instances of solely of mental states that are more or less one or the other, or even solely one or another. Um, so, for example, when it comes to certain beliefs that we have, some thinkers will say that there is nothing that it is like to have a belief. Um, and so your beliefs might be available for reasoning, for use in reasoning or rationally guiding speech and action, but there's nothing that it's like to have that belief. So we're talking about beliefs being, something that has something that are A conscious states, but not P conscious states. Now, I'm not sure whether I agree with that position. Um, And I did this little thought experiment on myself to try and clarify what I think about this. But before we run through this experiment, I want to ask all of you: do you think there is something that it is like to have a belief? We agree there's something that it is like to perceive a yellow banana, or to eat the banana, or to smell the coffee, right? We all agree there's something that it's like to do that. Is there something that it is like to have a belief? What do we think? And take a minute and think about it if you need to. And you can just pick any one of the beliefs that you have and ask yourself whether there is something that it's like to have that belief. A belief is not tangible, just like experiencing a smell. Uh, sorry, Kaya, do you mean that it is different? Do you mean that there is something that it's like to have a belief, but it's not the same sort of what its likeness as experiencing a smell? Okay, so there is something that it's like. Liam agrees as well. Um, any people think there's nothing it is like to have a belief? When Kim discusses this, he treats it as a real possibility that there's nothing that it's like to have a belief. But I did this little thought experiment on myself. I was thinking about this in sort of the weeks prior to this lecture, and I thought, I don't know if there's anything it's like to have a belief. But have you ever been told that some of your beliefs are wrong? If you have, was there something that was like? Well, sure, Liam, it could make you a part of who you are, but is there a subjective, qualitative aspect to holding a belief? Yeah, Leo, that's a good point. Beliefs could be accompanied by emotions which have qualia, but are not themselves qualia. Emotions certainly have qualia. There's always something that's like to have an emotion. But if I tell you that a belief you have is wrong, you might feel a certain sort of way about it. And I think there's an interesting question there. Is that a qualitative aspect of holding a belief that's being challenged, or is that merely an emotion that accompanies the denial of a belief that might be important to you? Liam, I'm not really sure what you mean by opinionated fact. I'm asking about the mental state. I'm asking about whether you think there's something it's like to there is a qualitative aspect to mental states such as beliefs. There certainly seems to be with desires, but beliefs? I think it's an open question. Yeah, Pluto believers maybe were upset that Pluto was reclassified as a dwarf planet. In that case, it seems like there's something it's like to have a belief, or at least the interaction of these beliefs and desires that produce an emotional response. Certainly, there's a qualitative aspect to that. Um, oh, beliefs are facts that are of your own. Well, beliefs aren't facts, but I think I see what you're saying. Um, mhm. Yeah, Joshua, like an interaction between certain beliefs, like that you hold belief P and that somebody maybe that's important in your life denies P, that could produce an emotional response, which has a qualitative aspect. Um, yeah, maybe it's disappointment of being wrong or frustrated. And these, so Leo is team accompany the qualia might accompany beliefs, but perhaps beliefs themselves don't have any qualitative character. So I just wanted to say, like, although um, it's not like a one or the other sort of thing. There is a little bit of discussion about whether certain mental states can have just one or the other. Um, so that's a question that I encourage you to ponder. Okay, qualia. I'm going to talk more about qualia. Um, I think we can actually skip this slide because we should all be pretty familiar with what I mean when I'm talking about qualia, right? They're the private, ineffable, what it's like qualities of our subjective experience. So I've got a list here. The smell of the coffee, it's a little bit shop worn by now, but or when you feel a cool wind on your face in the winter, when you put your favorite song on and you rock out, there's something it's like to do that. There's something it's like to see different colors. Perceiving red feels different than perceiving yellow, etc. Right? Those are all quale. So a quale is, what it's like. And phenomenal consciousness consists of qualia. And the problem of consciousness, as I said before, it's kind of related to the question of how qualia are related to the physical world. And that's just another version of the mind body problem, right? How do these physical brains produce ostensibly non physical qualia? Right? Because you can have an experience of red that's caused by an object in your environment and it's affecting your brain and nervous system in a certain way. But if you look in the brain, you don't see red, right? And we've seen already a few different possible answers um, to this question, right? Um, a few that are mentioned by Blackmore are substance dualism, which I think we're all very familiar with since we spent uh, a good bit of time at the beginning of class talking about Rene Descartes and substance dualism and the mind body problem. A substance dualist would say that qualia are real and they are perhaps of a different substance than brains are. Brains are extended substance, qualia, they're part of thinking substance, right? Of course, as Kim says in many places throughout the book, most philosophers nowadays are not substance dualists. If you find a dualist, it's most likely that you've got yourself a property dualist. So maybe qualia are not different substances, but they are different properties. They're mental properties, not physical properties. The physical properties would be like the wavelengths of light that are reflected off the surface of this banana. The mental property would be the yellow quale, right? Or you could be an epiphenomenalist and you could say, well, there are quale that exist in the mind, but they don't cause anything, right? That's T.H. Huxley's view. You could go way the other way and say that everything is qualia. That's subjective idealism, like Bishop George Berkeley, right? Everything's qualia. There is no actual physical banana. This is just an idea in the mind of God. That's why I can walk out of the room and come back and the banana is still there, right? Berkeley famously said, to be is to be perceived. So, how do things continue to exist if there are no people or animals or anything perceiving them? Well, God's perceiving everything all the time, right? Another another one that's not listed here, another possibility maybe is panpsychism. Um, Everything has a sort of mentality to it. I don't know about panpsychism. I think it sounds a little mystical, um, but I suppose it's worth a mention. And then, of course, you can be an eliminative materialist. So no, there aren't actually any qualia, or maybe there are, but we can't. It's not a useful concept in understanding consciousness. Or maybe whatever we think they are physical or a result of physical processes. Um, so those are a number of options we have before us. And Dennett uh, leans more toward the sort of eliminativist side, right? Or at least reductionist. You can do this little thought experiment for yourselves here. The experienced beer drinker, Dennett writes, says that beer is an acquired taste. When he first tried beer, he hated the taste, but now he has come to love it. But which taste does he now love? So when he first tried the beer, ugh. But later, pretty good. What changed? Or did anything change? Have you ever developed an acquired taste for something? It doesn't have to be beer, but is there something you tried that you didn't like at first, but then you grew to like? Mushrooms. Yeah. Maybe he developed the ability to lie to himself. Yeah. Yeah, no, no, Josh, I assumed you meant the food. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's a good example. Um, Speaking personally, um, the first time I ever tried a stout, like Guinness, for example, I wasn't sure about it. They're like, that's interesting. I'm not sure if I like this. But by the time I finished it, I thought, no, you know what? I like this. Yeah. Maybe your experience was similar. You used to hate mushrooms, but then after a while you grew to like them. But did the taste of the mushrooms change? Did the taste of the beer change? Or did his opinion change? What do you think? Really think about this. And it doesn't have to be like a food or drink example. Is there something, anything that you at one point didn't like and grew to like, or something that you did like and then grew to dislike? We need more examples besides stout and mushrooms. Ooh, I could make. Hmm. There's a recipe in there somewhere. Spicy food. Okay. Fish. Kaya, did you like it or and then dislike it or dislike it and then like it? May used to hate kimchi. Now May loves kimchi. Interesting. Oh, you disliked so Kaya used to dislike fish and spicy food. Now Kaya likes them. Peanuts. Maybe you've eaten too many, Liam. Uh yeah, dark coffee. Your taste buds have changed. Well, that kind of illustrates one of the confused ways of talking about this that I think Dennett is also trying to illustrate, right? Yeah, and you can make yourself sick of things, right? Like shawarma. I could never get sick of shawarma. So one time, well, over this one summer, I was always working the evening shift at my job, and on my way home, I would always get a shawarma, and I did that every day I was working. And I never got sick of shawarma. I do eat shawarma a lot less often, but I still like it. um, but um, we need to ask ourselves, right? Um, you know, did the qualia change, or did your opinion change? Can you even determine what changed? And this is all, and we're getting back to the beer drinker, like the beer is the same beer. So did the qualia of the beer change, or did the beer drinker's opinion change? It's hard to sort it out. And that's what Dennett is trying to show, is that we have this sort of confused way of thinking about and talking about the subjective aspects of our conscious experiences, right? I like Liam's point. Maybe your needs change, your body adapted to the food. Like, do you ever get a craving for something that you haven't had in a while? Or better yet, smelling food or tasting food when you're hungry versus when you're full. Like if I'm really hungry and I'm cooking a meal and I taste it, I'm like what if I've got it right, it's like, "Ooh, yeah, that's good. That's ready. I can eat that now." But then once I've eaten, I'm like, "Yeah, that was good." I'm not as excited about it anymore. And if you wanted me to eat more, I might be like, "Oh, I can't. I'm full," right? What changed? Did the qualia change? Yeah, veggies after eating junk. Yeah. Or eating something you haven't eaten in a while. um, is really nice. But what changed? Did the qualia change? Who knows? Okay, we're skipping ahead a bit. So this thought experiment is actually found in chapter 10, but I'm going to talk about it now. We're going to do Mary, the color scientist. And this is due to Frank Jackson. It's part of the knowledge argument against physicalism. So imagine, if you will, Mary, a neuroscientist with complete knowledge of neuroscience and also complete knowledge specifically of color vision, right? So she lives in the future. We've figured everything out about neuroscience. Mary specializes in the neurophysiology of colored vision. So she knows every physical fact that there is to know about how the brain perceives color, but also the properties of colored objects. Every physical fact there is to know. But she has spent her whole life in a black and white room. This room is set up such that everything is black and white. Even when Mary looks at herself, it's like she's in black and white. And she's only observed the world through a black and white monitor. So every time she looks and sees what it's like outside, it's in black and white. Every time she reads something about color or about brain science, it's just black and white text. Mary has never experienced color, but she knows all the physical facts about color. One day, Mary's captors let her out of her room. And for the first time, she sees color. She beholds all of the various colors of the world. How do you think she will react? Will Mary be surprised? Or will she not be surprised at seeing color for the first time? And, think about it for a minute. Think about it and decide what you think Mary's reaction will be. Who is team surprised? Liam says horrified, stunned, confused. We'll count that all under surprised, right? Surprised in a bad way. Like, oh my God, what is happening? What are all these things that I'm now perceiving? So she goes outside and sees something red. Will she say, "Oh, so that's what red looks like?" Or will she say, "That's red. I knew that's what red would look like." What do we think? Okay, Yosef believes Mary would be surprised. All right. Leo agrees. Samuel agrees. Kaya says, I feel like it would be the same reaction as when something you're learning finally clicks. Like, yeah, like, that's red. Yeah, of course. So it seems most of you are on team surprised. Yeah, it's not like, oh my God, that's red. No, I just mean, will she know? This is what we're really asking. When Mary's let out, will she already know what it is like to perceive red if her knowledge of color and neuroscience, etc., is complete? Will she know what red will actually look like before she's let out of the room? That's what determines whether she's surprised or not. So if Mary knows every physical fact about color, will she be surprised? Or will she know what all the colors would have looked like all along? The reason why this knowledge is this argument is formulated to support the knowledge argument against physicalism. And this is what the original author argued, what Frank Jackson argued. Jackson argued that when Mary leaves the room, she will be surprised because she learns something new. She has complete physical knowledge of color and of neuroscience before she leaves the room, but she learns something new when she leaves the room. She learns what it's like to experience red. So she has knowledge of all the physical facts, but now she has something new, knowledge of color qualia. Do you see what this entails? If you agree that Mary is surprised when she sees red for the first time, and you also agree that Mary, if you believe that Mary knew every physical fact there is to know about color and color vision and the neuroscience of color vision, and that she will be surprised when she leaves the room, then Mary learned a new fact that wasn't a physical fact. And that means that physical facts are not all there are, which means physicalism is false. That's what the argument is trying to get you. That's the conclusion that Jackson is trying to get you to reach. But of course, you might just deny that Mary will be surprised. You might say, if Mary really knows everything there is to know about color, she could imagine what red would look like. Well, yeah, like, how could I explain what it's like to perceive red to somebody who has, I think it's red-green color blindness, where they can't really see red or green? How could you convey that to them? Well, you could say, "Oh, well, it's easy. This is red is this wavelength of light, and green is this one." But that doesn't help them, right? They don't know what it's like to perceive red. But no, like if you really allow for Mary to know everything there is to know about color, then isn't it possible that she would know? Um, yes, I knew that's what red would look like. Yeah, that's right, Lee. And Jackson, by the way, has changed his mind about this. Jackson no longer uh, says that there are facts beyond physical facts. Um, but that's the idea, right? Like, just to reiterate one more time, if we grant that Mary knows everything there is to know about color, and she leaves the room, and you believe she's going to be surprised at what it's like to see a red object, then the idea is that what you think has happened is that Mary has learned a new fact, which is not a physical fact, because she already knew all those. So there must be facts, there must be other kinds of facts besides physical facts. Therefore, physicalism is either false or incomplete, or an incomplete picture of the world, right? Um, for those who think that Mary will be surprised, will you become a dualist? That's a question Blackmore asks in this chapter, right? Chalmers kind of, David Chalmers sort of adopts dualism, but it's a property dualism, right? And not everyone agrees. As I said, you can just deny that Mary will be surprised. One thing that Kim does a good job of, I think, is saying that what Mary had before was propositional knowledge or declarative knowledge, right? It was like knowledge of. It was knowledge of facts, like the wavelength of the color red is 750 nanometers or whatever. Excuse me. That's what Mary knew. But when she sees red for the first time, she's coming to view an old fact from a new perspective. You know, the ancient Greeks knew that water, and again, this is getting back into Kim. The ancient Greeks knew that water could put out fires. They didn't know that H2O could put out fires. Why? Well, they didn't know that water was made of um, two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom. But we know that. We know the same thing that the ancient Greeks knew, but from a different perspective. Maybe it's like that with color. Although I don't know. Because again, we're not talking about identity relations, we're talking about subjective experience. Uh, Mary also, and this is kind of what I started to say earlier. Mary might have got a different kind of knowledge. Mary might have all of the propositional knowledge or declarative knowledge about color before, and when she leaves the room, now what she's got is like a procedural knowledge, like knowing how. Um, Josh and Liam say some things here. Let's get to the chat. Joshua says, "My only issue with the thought experiment is that I agree she would think she would be surprised, but maybe only I only think that because I don't actually know what it is like to know absolutely everything about color." Yeah. So I feel like it's a pretty inconclusive thought experiment. That's fair. I mean, after all, we don't know what it's like to be Mary, who knows everything about color. And our intuitions are going to be different, right? Some of you are going to say Mary will be surprised. Some will deny that Mary will be surprised, right? We're going to have different intuitions about this. The point of a thought experiment like this is to clarify what we actually think, right? It's not to reach a definitive answer whether Mary will be surprised or not. It's whether you believe Mary will or will not be surprised. That tells you something about what you think about consciousness and about subjective experience and about physicalism. Um, Liam says, I don't think the properties of color are the only things involved in a reaction. If your reality suddenly changes without explanation, this is what causes the reaction. Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe Mary's surprise could be not just a result of the redness of the red, but also getting out of that room finally, But those are both great points. Yeah, very good. Um, I speaking personally, I think maybe she just gains a little bit of know-how. She has all of the knowledge that now she has knowledge how. Um, but you could also deny that Mary will be surprised. If we really follow the rules of the thought experiment and we really allow Mary to know everything that there is to know about color, then Mary should know what colors will look like if we really allow her to know everything there is to know. So Dennett says, like, okay, imagine Mary, we let her out of the room, and her captors fool her. They give her a banana, but the banana is blue. So imagine, not like this banana is getting more and more bruised. I should probably put it down, but I give Mary a banana. Here you go, Mary. Um, and it's blue. What will Mary's reaction be then? Will Mary be like, "Oh, a yellow banana," or will Mary say, "Hey, this banana's blue, and I know that bananas are supposed to be yellow"? So if Mary is surprised at seeing red for the first time, do you also think she'll be fooled by the trick banana? Or do you deny that she will be fooled by the trick banana? Again, take a moment and think about it. Whoops. Um, arguably there would be different qualia involved, right? Well, because the argument here now that we've kind of shifted gears is that if we really allow her to know every physical fact about color, she shouldn't be surprised when she sees red, and she should recognize the blue banana as a trick banana. Um, but that is, of course, coming from Dennett, who is a physicalist, and Jackson, at least at the time when he wrote the thought experiment, is not a physicalist, right? So Liam says, yeah, she knows bananas are yellow, but she's never seen yellow. She's never seen blue, so she should be tricked. And again, it's a thought experiment. Dennett thinks that the right conclusion is that Mary isn't fooled by the banana if we really follow the rules of the thought experiment, but you might disagree. But if you think Mary will be surprised at red, at seeing red for the first time, if you think that Mary will be fooled by a trick banana, you probably think that qualia are real. But if you don't think that Mary will be surprised at red, if you don't think that she will be fooled by the trick banana, qualia are, well, either physical or we can follow Dennett and kind of quine them away. But for those who were having like, how could Mary know yellow and blue and red without seeing them? Well, Mary might explain, since she knows everything about color, she knows what impressions that yellow and blue objects are going to make on her nervous system, as well as what the accompanying experiences are like. So she's not fooled by the trick banana. And this is what Dennett thinks it would mean to know everything about color and color perception. So Dennett actually thinks that if you think Mary is surprised when she leaves the room, you haven't actually followed the rules. So I don't know. If you think Mary is surprised or that she'll be fooled by the trick banana, you might be a dualist. You might think that knowledge of qualia is knowledge over and above knowledge of physical facts. So you might be a substance dualist and say, well, qualia are part of mental substance, not physical substance. Or you might be a property dualist and say that, well, qualia are, mental properties and they're not physical. So physicalism isn't wrong. It just doesn't quite capture the mental. Um, but if you deny that Mary will be surprised, you are probably a physicalist. And I have to say, like, initially my temptation was, when I first learned of this, was to say that Mary would be surprised. But the more I think about it, the more I'm not sure about that. The more I think about it, I think to myself, if we really allow Mary to know everything, maybe she won't be surprised. I I am a physicalist, so maybe that's why. Maybe I'm not answering the question so much as laying bare my fundamental assumptions. But that's a big part of why we do thought experiments. Actually, why don't we pause here and check? I mean, maybe you're still working out what you think of this thought experiment. Um, Joshua says, yeah, that's sort of my take as well. No, everything means absolutely everything. What this experiment reveals is whether you think everything is just physical facts or more facts other than physical facts. Yeah. But I'm a physicalist. Um we only know the color names, Leo says, because we are taught them. If her captors taught her blue was yellow, then the word yellow would refer to blue. Yeah, okay. But well, maybe that's still breaking the rules though, right? Mary knows all the physical facts, so she would know if her captors are misleading her, perhaps. But anyway, um you're probably going to want to sit with this one for a while, right? But I would like to ask you, um have we any other physicalists, or have we also some dualists? I know there are only 12 of us here. I wish there were more people here for the live lectures. And no judgment, right? I'm not like I'm a physicalist, but I'm not a snob. I'm not going to look down upon you if you're a dualist. But I wonder if there are dualists. So Samuel leans dualist. Substance or property, Samuel? Yeah, Joshua more physicalism. That's cool. But yeah, for Samuel, who says I'm a dualist, or maybe leans that way, how would you describe that? What sort of dualism would you subscribe to? Okay, well, as a reminder, substance dualism says that there are two different kinds of substance, and substances is something that can like exist independently, right? So there's mental substance and physical substance. And property dualism says there's only one kind of substance, physical substance. So it's really a kind of substance monism, but it says beyond that that there are physical properties and mental properties. Okay, property. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there are property dualists. Um, Liam says you can't learn the experience of color in a book, so for this scenario, you can't know everything, but you can still be an expert and know everything that can be studied. Yeah, maybe there are, again, like, are facts about experience physical facts? Are facts about the what it's like aspect of experience physical facts? Dennett says yes, they are. And that's why if we really allow Mary to know everything, she will know what red will look like, right? But that's a kind of knowledge that we have a hard time really imagining having, right? So problem of subjectivity strikes again. We could say, yeah, Mary knows everything, but what is it like to know everything? We'll never know. Isn't this fun? I love consciousness. Joseph is also leaning towards property dualism, but yeah, it's fine if you're not certain. Again, I'm not trying to sway any of you either way. I'm just kind of curious, right? But it does seem to happen that when my students start out, they're dualists, and then when we get to the end of the course, maybe not this course, but other courses, we get to the end of the course, and a lot of them have become physicalists. Kaya, go ahead.
One thing that I wanted to mention was all of those videos of people who experience a form of color blindness, putting on those special glasses that allow them to perceive a wider range of colors. I've never seen one where someone puts them on there and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is what I expected."
Yeah. Um, and so that's kind of the thing. Like, do we think Mary would be like those people who are surprised when they see a color they haven't seen before? Um, because the difference is like Mary is supposed to have complete knowledge of the physical facts of color perception, whereas people who are colorblind obviously don't have that knowledge, right? Nor do they have the experiential knowledge. So yeah, it's a tricky question. Yeah. Okay, so we have some physicalists and we have some property dualists. So that's cool. I want to do another thought experiment. Um, but I wonder if maybe we should take another quick break. I'm sorry for the frequent breaks today, but getting to the end of the term, as I mentioned, it is a lot of work, and I find that I run out of steam faster. Um, the further into the semester we go, uh, the less time it takes for me to lose that mental inertia before I need a quick break. Um, yeah, well, Liam, yeah, it is founded in logic. Whether it's founded in reality is another question. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's almost not the point. Like a scenario, no, a scenario like the one Frank Jackson lays out. You know, Mary's in a room and doesn't experience color. It's like, yeah, that, of course, that could never happen. But that's not the point, right? The point is that we're asking questions in order to clarify what we think about subjective experience and physicalism. Uh, we're trying to get clearer about what we actually believe, what our intuitions about conscious experience are. You know, again, to paraphrase Dennett, right? Philosophy is what you do when you don't know what questions to ask. By doing these thought experiments, maybe we can work out what questions we ought to be asking. Dennett also calls thought experiments intuition pumps, right? For the reason that they kind of expose our fundamental issue intuitions and beliefs about certain topics, and so that's what this is for, right? Um, so I do want to move on to talk about philosophical zombies, but I also want to take a short brain break. So let's say I have about 424, 425 on the microwave here. I think we'll maybe take another 10-minute break. How does that sound to everybody? Okay, Lee's giving me the thumbs up. Thank you. Um, if it's cool with everyone else, yeah, I have 425. So we'll come back at 435. See you all shortly. All right, everybody. I guess we should get back to it. Um, I think what I will do. Let's see, whereabouts are we? Oh, not that button. What's happening? Mm, I think I'd like to go through the philosophical zombies thought experiment with you all. Oh no, I've gone the wrong slide now. Yes, we'll do philosophical zombies, and then maybe we'll call it a day, and we'll pick it up next time for our penultimate class on Wednesday. Okay, just imagine, if you can, a creature that is physically identical to you in every possible way, and behaviorally identical to you in every possible way. So somebody like me that is physically, you know, not just in terms of appearance, but like if you look down to the molecular level, was indistinguishable from me and behaviorally indistinguishable from me, you know, talked like me, acted like me, etc. But had no conscious experience. So no qualia, no subjectivity, no phenomenal consciousness. The way David Chalmers puts it, this creature would, all is dark inside this creature. There's nothing that it's like to be such a creature. This is what is known as a philosophical zombie. Again, I'm following Blackmore a bit more closely here, but if you read Kim, um, Kim does explains this by covering Kripke, Kripke on philosophical zombies. But here's my question for you: can you conceive of such a creature? Can you conceive of a zombie version of yourself, which would be physically and behaviorally indistinguishable from you, but that lacks conscious experience? Can you do it? Can you imagine that such a creature could exist? And let's hear from people in the chat. Samuel says, not really. So Samuel, if I understand what you're saying, if there were like zombie Samuel, let's tentatively call it zombie Samuel, that was physically and behaviorally identical to you, it would have to be conscious, right? Joshua says that he can't imagine what it would be like to be. Well, there is nothing that it's like to be this creature. That's why it's a zombie. So, but you can imagine a world where one exists. Well, it would, like, I could be a zombie. Just pretend that I'm a zombie. Imagine that I'm a zombie. I'm not actually Professor Redstone. I'm zombie Professor Redstone. There's nothing that it's like to be me. Are you thinking like, okay, I can conceive of that, or do you think that's nuts, Professor? Maybe like, oh, okay, interesting, like the sunflowers. Yeah, basically, I would be like just reacting to stimuli, but not conscious of it, but in a very sophisticated way, more sophisticated than sunflowers, right? Um, Leo says it doesn't really make sense how that would work. If every atom were the same, then whatever gives rise to consciousness in me would also give rise to consciousness in my zombie. Yeah, and those are the two roads that you can take, right? Um, the question is whether zombies are conceivable. This is a conceivability argument, and it's aimed at sort of undermining physicalism, right? Somebody like John Searle thinks that it is conceivable that there could be, two systems or two entities that are identical in every way, except that one is conscious and the other is not. Um, And Chalmers agrees. Chalmers says the logical possibility of zombies seems obvious to me. A zombie is just something physically identical to me, but which has no conscious experience. All is dark inside. So this is a conceivability argument, as I mentioned, right? If zombies are conceivable, then zombies are possible, and that would mean that consciousness is something inessential. That would mean that consciousness is not physical. Right? If you can conceive of zombies, that implies some sort of dualism. Uh, so Joshua says, if everything is physically identical, then I think it is impossible. If it were possible, then you'd be back to the mind-body problem where you'd say everything is physical is the same, but the mental is different. But how do they interact? Yeah, yeah, exactly, right? So, just to kind of summarize, who is team zombies are conceivable? And then who is team zombies are not conceivable? I don't think they're conceivable. I cannot. It doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, same with Joshua. Not conceivable. If there were a being that was physically identical and behaviorally identical, like believe it was Leo, like Leo who said, right down to the atoms, then whatever gives rise to consciousness in me must also give rise to consciousness in my zombie twin. But I don't know. Do some of you find the zombies conceivable? Liam can conceive of a zombie. So you could conceive that I could be a zombie. I could be lecturing on this, but there's nothing that it's like to be me. Yeah, but I'm lecturing, I'm moving around like my non-zombie twin. I could be a zombie. Okay. So you can imagine it. Um, and that highlights another like you can imagine it, but you don't know if it's logical. That highlights another of these issues, right, with these conceivability arguments. Just because we can conceive of something, that doesn't necessarily mean it's logically possible. Just because something is logically possible doesn't mean that it is the case, right? It's like Kim said earlier in the book, there's nothing logically impossible about traveling faster than the speed of light. However, it is physically impossible to do so. And I can conceive of going faster than light. Like I could imagine I'm flying on a spaceship with warp drive or something. Um, but that doesn't mean that it's possible, right? Um, Todd Moody has an interesting thought experiment called Zombie Earth to reject consciousness in essentialism. Consciousness in essentialism is the word for the view that zombies are conceivable, right? That it is not necessary that a creature that is physically and behaviorally identical to you would be necessarily conscious, right? So Moody's arguing against this, and he has us imagine zombie Earth. So think back to Twin Earth from Hillary Putnam, but this time imagine that instead of water referring to XYZ instead of H2O, imagine that it is an identical copy of Earth, but it's populated entirely by zombies. So they're all behaviorally and physically identical to the people on Earth. So there's a zombie Josh on Zombie Earth. There's all of my students, zombie versions of you on Zombie Earth. And you go to zombie philosophy class at Zombie Carleton University, right? So all of these zombies behave just like we do, look just like we do, down to the microscopic level, but they have no inner experience. And they might have words for things like, various mental states or mental processes. They might talk about perceptions, beliefs, desires, dreams, emotions, knowledge, because they can use the words the right way. They can behave. They're behaviorally indistinguishable from us, and that means that their their verbal behavior would be indistinguishable from ours. But they don't have these experiences. These zombies don't dream. These zombies don't hope or fear. They wouldn't really understand these terms, Moody argues, because they don't have conscious experience. And the zombie philosophers on Zombie Earth would be rather puzzled by some of the things that we worry about, we conscious creatures worry about. Zombie philosophy, Moody is essentially saying, would be very different from non-zombie philosophy. They wouldn't be interested in the problem of other minds, the mind-body problem, or issues concerning qualia and subjectivity. Zombie philosophy would look a lot different than non-zombie philosophy. So even though on Zombie Earth, individual zombies they might be behaviorally and physically indistinguishable from us. At the level of zombie culture, we could tell that they are zombies. Consciousness is not inessential at that level of analysis. That's what Moody is saying. So even if you can conceive of a zombie, you probably can't conceive of a zombie Earth with zombie philosophers who are identical to the philosophers on our Earth, because the differences would become apparent at the cultural level. So Moody thinks like even if you can conceive of an individual zombie, that still doesn't mean that's still nothing in favor of consciousness in essentialism. Do you see what Moody is doing here? Do you follow his reasoning? How far do we have to go to finish philosophical zombies? I just need to save something for Wednesday. Do you know what I mean? Oh, really? It's bad? What? Why? Tell us why, Kaya.
Um, this is just the like my initial reaction to it. I'm sure you'll explain more of it and I'll be able to see the point of it. But so far the whole like oh, these zombies would talk about dreams and whatnot because they know about these things and can use the words appropriately. Just makes me think like these zombies are maintaining a social norm of like polite conversation, like talking about sleeping and dreaming, when if they don't experience those things, why would they even talk about them in the first place?
Well, and maybe that's a quirk of Blackmore's description of the thought experiment. But you could also just make a slight modification, and you could say that just as zombie philosophy would look different than human conscious human philosophy, um, still at the level of culture, their conversations would look different. Maybe they wouldn't talk about dreams, and so even if you had an individual zombie who claimed to have had a dream, when you get a bunch of these zombies together and they start talking about dreams, it would become apparent that they don't have these experiences, right? That's a possible way of making a little modification, right? One thing I will point out, though, and this is something Kim points out in chapter 10, is that while these zombies seem to lack phenomenal consciousness, they do have access consciousness. So a zombie might be also like a robot. You could talk about a robot or a computer program having consciousness, uh, but it looks like it's all access consciousness and no phenomenal consciousness. Another way I like to kind of explain this is by reference to the character Mr. Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation. So I know there's a few Trekkies in class. I know Holly is familiar, but she's not here today. So, okay, so I guess I better. I don't know how much I'm going to need to explain this. I'm not sure how much background I'm going to need to give you, but who knows about Mr. Data from Star Trek? He's the android um, officer. Okay, Samantha. Okay, good. Um, so if every single zombie acted the same as a non-zombie counterpart, then wouldn't the culture also be the same? Well, Moody says no. Um, the differences would be emergent, right? At a higher level of complexity. That's I think what Moody is saying. Um, Leo knows. Okay, good. So Data doesn't have any emotions, at least not initially. Um, Data doesn't feel pain or pleasure. Data's kind of like a philosophical zombie in some respects. I'm not going to say there's nothing it's like to be Mr. Data, but he does seem to be phenomenally impoverished, right? Um, so maybe Data is kind of like a philosophical zombie. Or I had another student who referred to Data as a qualia freak, and it was the first time I had heard that term, and I thought that's a good way of putting it, right? Um, so with Data, Data's like predominantly access consciousness and very little phenomenology. These philosophical zombies are all access consciousness, no phenomenal consciousness. Oh yeah, Sunny from iRobot. Do you think there's something that it's like to be Sunny from iRobot, the movie, which was based on the Isaac Asimov's writing? It seems like it. I haven't seen the movie, but I did a little reaction to clips of robots and AI, and I saw the clip where Sunny's being interrogated, and Sunny gets angry. Um, so do you think that Sunny is really experiencing anger, Samantha?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Um, I mean, it's interesting in the movie because there's actually a whole horde of these robots. They all have the same structure, but Sunny is kind of isolated from all them.
Mm.
So when he's tortured, in a sense, he's experiencing anger, but it's kind of like the whole idea is that Sunny has developed his own consciousness versus this horde of other zombies or
Hmm.
robots that haven't. So
Right.
in order for him to experience anger, it's kind of a little different in the movie. You should watch it.
I will. I think I will. Um, and it's not like the way that artificial consciousness is depicted in science fiction is monolithic, right? I mean, data is qual is phenomenally impoverished. Sunny is arguably not. The robots from Star Wars certainly seem to feel pain, right? I've made this reference before, but there's a little robot in the Star Wars movie Return of the Jedi who's being tortured in Jabba's palace, um, which I mean, it's kind of funny, but it's also kind of disturbing. Um, but apparently, that's a problem that's been solved in the Star Wars universe. We know how to make robots feel pain. Um, but yeah, I guess just to bring it back, my point was that the zombies are conscious in the sense that they have access consciousness, but they lack phenomenal consciousness. Um, So, what do you think of this thought experiment? Well, some disagree with Moody, right? Some of you might disagree with him as well. If zombies are supposed to be indistinguishable from conscious beings, they shouldn't be indistinguishable at the cultural level as they are in this thought experiment. So maybe they aren't really zombies, or maybe Moody's broken the rules of his own thought experiment. You might say that in response to him. And others say that, well, this is all just misguided anyway. Patricia Churchland thinks that um, thought experiments are feeble, right? She says here, this is just a demonstration of the feebleness of thought experiments. I think that's a bit harsh. Um, Dennett would say that just because you can imagine something, so what? What does that amount to? And I agree more with Dennett than Churchland. I don't think thought experiments are feeble. I think thought experiments are very helpful. But yeah, just because you can conceive of something, so what? I can conceive of a winged horse or a perfect island. And that does not mean that either of those things exist just because I can conceive of them, right? Maybe though these thought experiments what they ultimately do is tell us what we don't know about the world and about consciousness. And all of this, I think I'll just mention briefly, is also tied to the problem of solipsism. So remember the beetle in the box that we looked at back in the earlier part of the class. If you were to see something that was behaviorally and physically indistinguishable from the other sorts of conscious beings that you had seen, that you had interacted with, would you just assume that it's not conscious because of the problem of subjectivity, or would you do what we do all the time with other people and say, yeah, well, this is obviously somebody who has a mind, right? I think that question is going to become really important, um, to in a sense, it already is very important in discussions over whether generative AI might become conscious at some point. And admittedly, this is a bit of a tricky situation for me. I I think there are good reasons to doubt that generative AI is conscious now, or that it will ever become conscious or gain consciousness in the near future. Um, but that's an intuition. It's not something I can really make a coherent argument for. Or maybe if I could, if I sat down and tried, but that's just my intuition. But that's not the intuition I follow when I'm interacting with other human beings, right? Like if you say to me, like, ChatGPT is just so human-like in its responses. I'd say I still don't think it's conscious. And you'd say, but maybe it passes the Turing test, right? It seems to be demonstrating that it's thinking um, via its verbal behavior, and other things that do that are conscious things. So why isn't ChatGPT conscious? Um, uh, it's an interesting question, right? Um, every claim that you could make about, oh, ChatGPT isn't conscious, ChatGPT doesn't really have a mind, et cetera, et cetera. You could actually make that argument about other people. Um, so there's this worry of solipsism, right? That I don't think I'm entirely clear on how to deal with. Um, and it's also very interesting that all of these new AI applications are really raising classic problems in philosophy, like the problem of other minds and stuff. Very cool, very very cool. Okay, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about Zimbos, and then maybe we'll wrap up a little early. Um, Dennett wants us to try and clarify our thinking about philosophical zombies, so he introduces a new kind of zombie called a Zimbo. Um, Imagine that there's a zombie, okay? It, but this zombie's not a philosophical zombie like Zombie Josh, who is physically and behaviorally indistinguishable from regular Josh. No, this zombie is just a simple sort of creature that behaves in simple ways appropriate to its needs, like the sunflower, right? Um, there's no inner experience when the sunflower orients itself to the sun. There's nothing it's like to be a thermostat where you set it, and if the temperature falls below, I don't know, 22 degrees Celsius, it turns on, and if it goes above, it turns off, right? Um, that's a zombie, like a reflex agent, we would call this in cognitive science. Um, And we can imagine progressively more and more complicated versions of such a zombie. Leo says here about ChatGPT, if ChatGPT started an AI rights movement, then it would start to believe it was conscious, because that's what a human would actually do if it was being enslaved to people to write people's essays. Yeah, yeah, that's a good point, right? Um, if ChatGPT really were conscious and really thought it was at the mercy of us, it might not take over and kill all humans, but maybe, yeah, it would start an AI rights organization. I don't know. Yeah, that's a good point. Um, okay, so we have our simple zombie, which is the simple creature that behaves in simple ways. And now we can imagine a more complex zombie made out of simpler systems, like our simple zombie. And then we can imagine this getting quite complicated. Dennett says this zombie monitors its own activities, including even its own internal activities, in an indefinite upward spiral of reflexivity. This is the Zimbo, a sort of reflexive, recursive, self monitoring zombie. A Zimbo is a zombie that, as a result of self monitoring, has internal but unconscious higher order informational states that are about its other lower order informational states. So you could talk to a Zimbo and ask it about its mental states, its dreams, its feelings, its beliefs, its desires, and it could monitor its internal states and it could answer your questions. And it could do so in a way that would seem like the Zimbo was conscious. Dennett even writes, the Zimbo would unconsciously believe that it was in various mental states, precisely the mental states it is in a position to report about should we ask it questions. It would think it was conscious even if it wasn't. So a couple of interesting things are going on here. Dennett is sort of gesturing toward these higher order thought or higher order perception theories of consciousness, which I think we'll save for next time. But the idea is on higher order thought and higher order perception that what you need to become conscious of a mental state is a higher order state. So on higher order thought theory or hot theory, You are conscious of a mental state if you have a higher order thought about it. And on Hop theory or higher order perception theory, you're conscious if you have a higher order perception. So imagine, and this is the example that these thinkers often use. Imagine that you're driving and you're coming up to a set of traffic lights, and the light is red, right? So the light is red. You perceive, you sense, first you sense that the light is red. You perceive, or you sense redness, and you perceive that the traffic light is red. You're conscious of that if you have the thought that you are perceiving a red light, or if you perceive that you yourself are perceiving a red light. That's the sort of long and or the short version of it. Likewise with these Zimbos, the Zimbos would believe they're in mental states, the mental states that they're in a position to report about, and it would think it was conscious even if it wasn't. And here's the real kicker. Um, Dennett claims we're all zombies. Nobody is conscious, not in the systematically mysterious way that supports such doctrines as epiphenomenalism. We're like the Zimbo. We can talk about our internal states. We can talk about beliefs, desires, experiences, feelings, emotions, dreams. We can enjoy the beauty of a sunset, or we can enjoy our favorite song, enjoy a good cup of coffee. But if we think that consciousness is this separate thing that exists independently of all that, we're making a mistake. Um, and really, on this view, if you believe if you like this Zimbo talk, then the difference between phenomenal and access consciousness starts to fall away a little bit. Um, Consciousness is kind of like an illusion for Dennett, right? Qualia aren't real, objectively real things. It's kind of just our brain, as I said earlier, is misleading. Our experience of our own minds misleads us as to the nature of how our minds work. With consciousness, with the nature of selves, with the nature of perceptions, with the nature of the relation of our minds to our bodies, you name it. Our mind makes it seem like something else is happening. But for Dennett, we don't have mental properties or mental substance. No, we are like the Zimbo. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Yeah, Murderbot. Okay, so I've only seen the first episode. But it seemed like he's hiding. Um, yeah, he's kind of it's like one of those cases where he's surpassed the boundaries of his programming and he's become conscious or at least conscious or at least sentient. But yeah, he is a bit like a Zimbo, right? And like he's just kind of um, got complicated enough that he can reflect on his own mental states. So he has higher order thoughts and higher order perceptions, and he can make verbal reports. And it seems to him that he is conscious, right? I'll have to finish that. Yeah. Liam asks, don't we define consciousness based on our experiences? So how can you make a claim and then make a counterclaim at the same time? Can you clarify that, Liam? I mean, we do understand phenomenal consciousness in terms of experience. Yeah, I get that. But what do you mean about the claim and the counterclaim?
So, if we define consciousness by our experience of consciousness, but then say that our experience is also not consciousness, then you're countering the claim that defines the thing that creates the claim to count. Like it's
Well,
circular.
what I'm saying is that we are conscious, but the way the way in which we are conscious misleads us about the nature of consciousness, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And this is what Dennett does in this book. He tries to say like and this is where we'll pick it up next time. Dennett is arguing against a Cartesian picture of consciousness, where consciousness is like happening in a special sort of time and place in the brain. Dennett says it's not like that. And Dennett actually advocates a view called, or a theory of consciousness called multiple drafts. And we're going to talk about that more next time. I'm actually very disappointed that Kim does not spend very much time on Dennett, because I think Dennett really does a fantastic job of taking some of the mystery out of this. But yeah, I think yeah, we can say what we mean by consciousness is experience. Um, but our experiences mislead us about how consciousness actually works. That's the claim I'm making. And that's indeed the claim that Dennett and a lot of other similar thinkers make as well. I mean, I'm no Daniel Dennett. I'm not saying that. But I agree with what he says here. Um, but here's what the zombie debate comes down to. If you think zombies are possible, then consciousness is inessential as far as the physical side of things is concerned. It's an optional extra, right? I could be a zombie, and there would be no way to tell. And it's a mystery why we would be conscious at all. And if you do not believe zombies are possible, then anything that's made like us or behaves like us must be consciousness. And it's still a mystery in that case. Like, why? How is it that we're back to the mind body problem? How does my brain give rise to subjective conscious experience? How on earth does it work? Very fun to think about. But I am team not zombie. I don't think zombies are possible. I think if there were a creature like if there were a transporter duplicate incident, right? Like we talked about earlier in the course. And I have a molecule for molecule duplicate of me that looks, acts, indistinguishable from me, including in terms of its physical and verbal behavior. Well, that would be conscious. That would be a conscious creature. My transporter duplicate, it's not like only one of us would have a soul, right? Like when I get split up in the transporter, my soul is only one of my bodies is ensouled, and the copy, that's the zombie. No. I think that if I were in some kind of Star Trek transporter duplication incident, both copies of me would be conscious. So, but you feel free to disagree. Um, okay, I think I've got to save some material for next time. So, are there any questions? Because I think I might wrap it up now. Any questions about anything we've covered today? Excellent. Of course, if you start thinking about this, or if you continue on thinking about it, and you do think of something, please feel free to reach out. I think all these thought experiments are great opportunities for discussion. So if you do want to talk about something, I would do it on the Discord server, and maybe we can generate a little bit of discussion there. But for now, that's all I have. I want to save the rest for Wednesday. And then on Thursday, it's just going to be a brief wrap-up lecture where I'll answer any questions you have about anything, really. Yeah, I have a minute, Samantha. Um, okay, so all right, let's wrap it up for today. And Samantha, you can just stick around in the Zoom meeting here, and I'll try and answer your question. But to everyone else, thanks. This was fun. I'll see you all on Wednesday.